One of the things that I'm not able to do is I'm not able to stay in one place because I'm Italian and I have to use my hands and I have to walk around. So if it's creeping anybody out, I'll try not to stay in one spot too long. But I think that, you know, in the last few years I've talked towards the end, like the end, and that's always hard because everybody wants to go. Now it's, you know, day one right after lunch. So we'll see. At least I'm not between you and lunch. So I'm also very cognizant of the fact that now we're recording the presentation, which means I can't completely misbehave because there'll be a recording of it. But, you know, fortunately we have the finest equipment available, and it very good to talk to you. Very good. So that's good. I'm going to talk today about the journey that we're on at D&B in terms of not just data, but the relationship of data and how that's informing our thinking. So, you know, D&B is an interesting company. It's been around. There's only 11 companies in the United States that have been around as long as D&B, and before the financial crisis, there was about 49. So that's kind of scary. We got started before the Civil War. And the basic premise of the company is, should I do business with this guy? And if I do, how much opportunity is there? So we call that total risk and total opportunity. How hard could that be? Well, that could be really hard. It's arguably one of the largest commercial databases on Earth. It's not as big as a lot of the databases that the people in this room represent as databases go. But in terms of the dynamic nature of business and how frequently things change, and then you think about doing this in hundreds of countries, in different languages, in different writing systems, there's different statutory environments, there's different laws for permissible use, there's a constantly changing competitive landscape. All of a sudden, you know, Flappy Birds is collecting data on companies, and, you know, and there you go. So it's a very interesting world that we live in, interesting in the Chinese sense of the word, that it could be an opportunity or a curse. We haven't decided which yet, but it's definitely something where there's an opportunity to make new mistakes every day, and that's one of my goals, is to try to make new mistakes every day. So talk a little bit about three different things. The first is, you know, how hard could this really be? You know, when you think about businesses in terms of, you know, collecting data as opposed to exoplanets, it seems like it might be a little easier to collect information on businesses, but we'll see. The second is, anybody in the room speak French? So keep me honest. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. La même chose. Interesting French expression. The more things change, the more they're kind of the same. Everything old is new again, right? So, ça marche? Oui? Non? Bon, merci. But the problem here is that things really aren't the same. So things that are the same are different now. They're used for different reasons. So the same kind of information that we used to throw away because it was unuseful is now the gold. The same kind of information that we used to try very hard to go get is now freely available. So very, very different world, while yet the same kind of problems, just cast in a different way. And then finally, I want to talk about relationships and the connected nature of data and how we view that, and some of the work that we're doing with the fine folks from Wolfram Solutions. So I'm going to try and get all that done in less than 30 minutes because that's what they asked me to do. So there you go. First thing is, does anybody here speak Greek? Rats. There's always somebody. So this says gnothesefton, if you want to read it in like ancient Greek. It means know yourself. Does anybody know what this is? It's the inscription at Delphi, when you go to the temple at Delphi. So one of the original predictive analytic environments was actually the Temple of Delphi. And you would basically go there with a question. And just like any true analytical environment, you would get an answer that you can interpret any way you want. So you would go and ask a question, and your question might be, you know, will I be victorious in war? And the answer would be, the true of heart are victorious in war. And you say, well, I'm true of heart. And you go off, and if you win, then the oracle was right. And if you lost, you were not true of heart, and the oracle was right. So we do a lot of that in the big data environment, especially when we talk about businesses. So the first thing I did was I looked at D&B, and I said, well, how do we talk about ourselves? That ought to be pretty straightforward, right? So here's one, you know, this is from our corporate website, and it says D&B. And then down here, this is on our investor relations page, contact us, the Dun & Bradstreet Corporation, right? Is that the same company? Look at our address down here, 103 John F. Kennedy Parkway, Short Hills, New Jersey. If you look at my business card, it says 103 JFK Parkway, not John F. Kennedy Parkway. Here's the problem. PKWY on my business card, Parkway here, not really the same thing. John F. Kennedy and JFK, not really the same thing. NJ in New Jersey, not really the same thing. Actually, Short Hills isn't even really a city. It's the hoity-toity part of a town called Millburn. So if you're in Short Hills at our headquarters and you call the police, the Millburn police show up, right? So nothing's right. The only thing right on my business card is 103. And that's a company that's involved in curating identity of businesses. And that's how we talk about ourselves. Without even trying hard, that's how far off the mark this gets really quickly. And so we talk about, all the different pieces of data that we need to collect to solve problems like this. We can use thousands of we call them match points, thousands of ways. You think you're going to go on a list and find AAA limousine, good luck, right? So, and if you think you're going to go on a list and find AAA limousine in China, when it's not called AAA limousine, lots of luck, because they don't even have the letter A. So these are nasty problems, and one of the ways that we've traditionally solved it is by collecting lots and lots and lots of data, and then being really good at curating that data into this sort of master view of an organization. And then no matter how you ask about it, we're pretty good at getting that right. So whether you use a trade style or not, doing business as name, whether you kind of spell it wrong, Dun & Bradstreet, you put Dun with two N's, we'll get there. We'll figure it out. We look at sound, we look at meaning, we look at geospatial inference, we look at heuristics, watching people and what they do. We look at the context of your question, we look at transliteration and translation. We do all of that in order to decide whether or not we feel as good about the answer that we're coming up with as you do about the question you asked. And that's just to start the process. And then, of course, as you get involved in other languages and other writing systems, and does anybody here speak a language anybody here speak Chinese or Japanese? Which one? Chinese. Mandarin or Canton? Perfect. So could you tell me what Zhongguo Yinhan is? China Bank, not Bank of China? Well, which is it? Make up your mind. It doesn't matter because Chinese is palindromic, right? Word order is irrelevant, right? So I could do Zhonghan Ying Guo? No, of course not. So some of the things have to stick together, but some of the things can move, right? And if I look up those 4 characters, it's China Bank in the dictionary, right? No, it's Central Kingdom Silver Storage, right? Yeah, but it's obvious, right? Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, okay. Welcome to hell. This is another problem, and we didn't even get to the problem yet, right? This is the stuff that we do in our human brain, and we just take it for granted. And then we got to connect all of these entities into corporate family trees. So the parent, the subsidiary, the branch, how hard could that be? Well, that could be really hard. So you go into Dunkin' Donuts and you trip on the carpet and you spill something on yourself, and of course it's their fault and you want to sue them. Well, you need to sue Dunkin' Donuts, right? Well, they probably have deeper pockets, but Dunkin' Donuts is a franchise. And the mat that you tripped over was in a shopping mall, and the shopping mall is owned by a management company, and the franchise is owned by a real estate company. You gonna figure that out by looking at the mat while you're lying there? No, right? So this is a problem. So gravity is not just a good idea, it's the law. But trying to figure out corporate relationships like this is massively complicated. And then trying to do that on top of language and on top of trade style. And we didn't even get to the problem yet. So if we look at this total risk, total opportunity thing that's going on, where our customers come to us and ask these questions, that problem has become much more complex just because of the amount of noise in the room right now. So data is growing at an unprecedented rate. The rate of growth of data is growing at an unprecedented rate and arguably an unmeasurable rate. And so it's kind of like jumping out the window, and as you're falling, the acceleration due to gravity is increasing. So not only are you falling faster and faster, the rate at which you're falling faster is getting faster. That's not a good thing. When we look at the human race and our ability to respond to that kind of growth, we're talking about things like the Black Plague and Ebola. We're not so good at those yet. I'm hoping that we're getting it better with Ebola. There's some people in the room that would be able to tell me about that, but so maybe I should be careful. But my point is that we're in uncharted waters here. So at D&B, the way it plays out to me in my world is, don't worry about the numbers here, because it's very hard to peg any of these numbers. How many transactions a day do we do? Well, that depends on what you call a transaction. How many rows of information do you have? Well, in which database? There's hundreds. Well, how many sources of social data do you have? Well, it depends on what you call a source, and it depends on what you call social. So when we try to peg our version of this cube, we can argue, those of us that are in the room from D&B can argue about almost any number here. But my point is, people want to know this stuff, right? They want to know, well, how big is your data? Well, it's kind of like saying, well, how alive is swimming? We're not even comparing concepts that make any sense. And yet, we need to know. So this total risk, total opportunity equation has become much more complex. We look at different layers of opportunity where we used to say, they're likely to pay their bills or they're not likely to pay their bills. Now it turns out that people that consistently pay their bills late could be actually a really good credit risk because you can charge them more money. Whoops. That sounds like an opportunity, right? When we start to look at segmentation, as a company about to grow, well, if I can just look at that company and their numbers, their sales and their employees, which was our traditional way of looking at it, I might be able to predict something. But if I could look at their customers and their vendors and their customers' vendors and their vendors' customers' vendors and their customers' vendors' vendors' customers and do the Kevin Bacon thing, do you think I could do a better job of figuring out when they're reaching some change in that second derivative where their point of inflection? I think we could, and in fact we can. So some really exciting things going on in this space, but I haven't even gotten to the problem yet. So in general, the V's of big data, volume, velocity, variety, value, all those things, we've got to deal with them. Everybody in this room has to deal with those, but those are table stakes. There's also changes in the environment because the businesses in that environment know this. So for example, virtual businesses, it's a lot easier now to start a business than it ever was. If any two of us wanted to become a consulting firm, you want to be consultants together? Okay, good. Are we a business yet? No. Sorry? What do you want to call it? Let's call it Synergy. That's a good name. Okay. We're going to be Synergy Inc. Okay. Are we a business yet? No. Right? If we go on GoDaddy and register a website, are we a business yet? Put it on your credit card? You mind? We'll use it. Okay. Are we a business yet? No. It's a guy that bought a website, right? A web domain. You know what I mean? A domain, right? Would you like to do business with us?
Totally.
Okay. Would you enter into a virtual agreement, a verbal agreement with us that in exchange for valuable compensation, valuable consideration, you will compensate us at a value that we will determine in the next 20 minutes? Yeah. Any lawyers in the room? We're close. We're not quite a business yet, but we're getting there, right? Can we shake hands on it?
You need to go and
can you give me $1? Because then there's consideration. My point is, somewhere in here, we're going to become a business, but trying to find that moment in time is nasty. It's massively difficult. And with virtual businesses where these things can break, and you just said, I'll help you do it. And I said, well, what if we do some kind of a JV and you get a share in that? What, now, are we a business? And what's a business? And globalization, everything's connected to everything. So we can make mistakes much faster now, and we can make much more pervasive mistakes than we ever could. And privacy and permissible use are changing faster than you can say privacy and permissible use. Anybody here from Germany? In Germany, we could argue that if you get on the phone and you're in Germany and I'm here and you tell me the name of your business, that you may have violated the law. Not really, but it's close, right? There's all kinds of strange privacy laws there, right? We got to be really, really careful. Not that they're wrong or right, they just are. China, same thing. Different set of laws, different set of complications. Mexico, Malaysia, all of that. We just got past the easy part. Now we get to the part where everything that's changing, everything that's kind of old is new again. Oh, that number's counting backwards. That's not good. So when we define innovation at D&B, and when we think about what does it really mean, these are some of the phrases we use. New ways of doing old things, doing new things, ways of doing new things, creating simpler, unsolved problems. Those are all arguable definitions of innovation. What about new ways of cheating? What about when these guys did this thing with Home Depot? Was that innovation? Yeah, kind of was, right? So innovation isn't always for good, and innovation isn't always good for everybody. Sometimes it's massively suboptimal. So we're trying to find the right kinds of innovation, and that involves using lots of information that we don't have a lot of experience with. I'm going to be honest with you. We collect some corporate responsibility data. We don't have a lot of experience with using that to predict the kinds of things that we try to predict. Social data, I think everyone, if to be fair, is at some level of experimentation with social data. It's massively unstructured. I'm going to say unstructured in quotes because I'm not sure what unstructured means. Often it means we don't understand it yet. But you know where you got it. You know what it isn't, right? So it's not completely unstructured. Connections, which we're going to talk about today. These are all different types of information that are on the stage now, literally and figuratively, that we have to think about how we're going to use. And then we've got signals. A lot of talk about signals this morning and precision and recall, and yeah, really, really important in this space. And proxies. You know, you can't get the information you want completely, but you have enough of it to understand how it behaves. So if I can get other information that's equally predictive for the same kind of decision as the data that I don't have, can I use? Yeah, you bet you can. As long as you do it right, and you get your chaos and your genie and all that. You got to get all that stuff right, but yes, you can do it. And what about behaviors? What about meta rules? Rules that imply the emergence of new rules that we don't know about yet. And just kind of like this conversation. What's a rule anyway? Something we call black cats. Where's my friend Samar? I'm quoting him actually. The black cat in the dark room, right? So, you know, is it there or is it not there? And I know you're quoting Schrodinger, but the idea being that, you know, we're trying to find, by the absence of the data that we observe, the likely existence of data that we didn't get to yet. Really, really powerful. Powerful stuff if we can figure out how to do it right. We've got some capabilities that we've been emerging over the years. We've been talking about this concept of people in the context of business. So we start to collect information. You're not your name, right? But there's a whole bunch of data about you, including your name. And if we can start to coalesce that information and do dynamic clustering, we can figure out when the preponderance of information seems to indicate the identity of a person. Eventually, we get enough of that data to say this is a collection of data about a person and this is data that's not about that person. And we get to this unique identity. But then we have something that we call, right now we call them hyperclusters. Hypercluster, we used to call these flocks because they're like flocks of birds. They're clusters of data that are all the same, like consultants at IBM named John Smith. It gave rise to the unfortunate term cluster flocking, so we now call them hyperclusters. But in any event, we have these terms for things that didn't exist before, and now we have to measure their behavior. And then we can look at how can we use things like that for maybe for segmentation or for discovery of new behaviors. We're looking at signals like, did people inquire? Did we see web traffic? Looking at labor market data, import, export data. All of this is fodder for the cannon here. And then we got this massive amount of data that we call social, that we're really honestly, I think as a human race, just beginning to figure out how to exploit, even though we've spent a lot of money building it. The really tricky part is to pick the pieces of it that you're going to think about and think about them really, really, really hard. And so we're in the process of doing that right now, starting with unstructured data and leading to the parts of social data that we really want to pay attention to. And what kind of meaning can we get from that? Sentiment, signals, all the things that I've been talking about. It's a little bit like Jaws. We've figured out right now that we're going to need a bigger boat. This is much harder than anybody thinks it is. Anybody that tells you it's easy and starts with first take all your data and put it here and then train it, well, okay, but those two steps were impossible. So, you know, in some cases it's possible, but not for the kind of things that we're doing. So this is a massively complex problem that we're undertaking. Some things that we have to believe. We have to be able to solve things like FBI hunting San Francisco man with explosives. I'm pretty sure they're not going around blowing things up. No, he's not there. You know, it's just bad grammar, right? Blind bishop appointed to sea. Here's one in French. J'ai publié une nouvelle photo sur Facebook. I wonder what kind of photo. Here are all the different spellings of Gaddafi, right? We got to be able to solve problems like that, because when you write in Arabic, you leave the vowels out, and then when you transliterate it into English or the Roman alphabet, you have to put them back in. That's why sometimes it's spelled with a G, and sometimes with a Q, and sometimes with a K, because it depends on how you interpret the pronunciation of the vowels that come after the initial consonant, which is an Arabic letter and not a Roman letter to begin with. Kill me now. Then we have things like missing plane found, update, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. And when you read it, it's about all the shakeups going on in Malaysia. It has nothing to do with the plane being found, and the plane hasn't been found. How dare you? You made me read your article. Oh, I guess that's what headlines are for, right? Here's a photo and all the astronomical data of the planet Rexicorico-Fallopatorius, which, if any of you are Doctor Who fans, you'll know this is a completely fictitious planet, but it's got all kinds of astronomical data here. So if your algorithm finds that one and picks it up and puts it in a database, you're going to have some splaining to do, right? So some of the strategies that we use to get around problems like this: recursion, being able to build knowledge by looking at multiple places; triangulation, sort of informing the truth and adjudicating veracity; assessment of optimism and pessimism when people are involved. And now we get to the really hard part. The really hard part is about relationships. So everything's connected to everything. And if we can connect everything to everything, even though most of those connections will be empty, the parts that aren't will be really, really powerful. So we've already been doing this for a while. This is an example of a malfeasance ring that we have discovered. We can't call it fraud because they didn't defraud us, but you know, we've been pretty good at figuring out people that, come on, that was funny. We've been pretty good at figuring out, you know, people that are doing sneaky things for a long time. Several hundred times a day, people lie to us. Are you shocked? Probably more than several hundred times a day. But now we're starting to look at the relationships of people and business, because if we can define what a person is in their footprint of data, and if we can adjudicate that in a consistent way, and we can put them in the context of a business, and we can tell when that business is talking about itself, like in a press release, or when that person that works for that business is talking about their business, or vice versa, or when some other business is talking about that business, or somebody who doesn't work for that business is talking about the person. If we can start to do all this, then we can start to look at some of these well, guess what? We can. Now, I'm not saying we solved all the problems yet. There's still that nasty problem of the way we use language, but being able to figure out who's speaking and about whom and what did they say and how did they feel when they said it, really, really powerful stuff. So these are the problems that we're working on really, really hard right now. Here's an example. XYZ is an excellent company to do business with. Show of hands. Positive, negative, somewhere in between? Positive statement? Yep. Come on, play the game, right? Okay. It's not done. So we got XYZ is. We can find the verb is. It's transitive verb. We got the subject, XYZ. Company. XYZ is company. What kind of company? Excellent company. That's why you said this. But the sentence isn't over. So it says, if you like. And if you like is in a database of qualifiers, like more or less, so to speak, for the most part. So we'll take one away because we saw that qualifier. Oh, the sentence isn't over yet. If you like destroying nature, right? So it's sarcasm. This is something that's really hard to teach because it's something that evolves with language. But assuming we can wave that problem away, and if we've got this people in the context of business thing right, we can start to look at people that are tweeting things and the company that they're connected to, and start to ask questions like, well, if the leader of this company feels this way, how do other people in the company feel? And is that consistent? Is the leader ahead of the mean? Is the leader leading the mean? Is the standard deviation higher or lower? And that would imply different things about what's going on in terms of the intervention of that leader. Gee, that sounds pretty powerful. And then if I could look at something like this comment, which you may have trouble reading, but it says Martin Guitar makes a great instrument. Martin Guitar is either a person named Martin Guitar or it's a company named Martin Guitar, but either way, it's not the company we're talking about, so I don't care. So being able to rule things out without actually knowing what they mean, and then being able to rule out people that have the same name that aren't the same person. We're very, very close to being able to do this kind of stuff. We can do some of this right now. Some of it is not as good as we need it to be able to do it for anybody else yet. But if we can draw a string around different social sources or different unstructured sources and then start to do the normal measures of central tendency that you might do and look at what's happening to simple things like mean, standard deviation. We don't have to get crazy with the math here. We can start to do some pretty powerful things with these observed relationships. And that's just talking about the entities. Now we start to talk about how we can connect all that entity data to other data, like customer data and macro data and signals and events, and we start to get into these dyadic relationships. And then those dyadic relationships over time give you longitudinal dyads, and those longitudinal dyads projected one way or the other in what-if scenarios give you dynamic probable longitudinal dyads. This is the work that we're doing with Wolfram Solutions right now. So how am I doing so far, Samar? Okay. So you may have missed this news article in the Data Science Intelligentsia, which I made up, but it's about the work that we're doing. Someday we'll actually see a real news article like that. But this is some output from some of the CDFs that we've created with the project that we're working on, where we've connected essentially everything we know to everything else we know. And this is anonymized right now and summarized, so you can't figure it out. But these are two big companies, and you can see that they can see each other. And they're working with some of the same vendors, and they're very large companies. These are oil companies. But what you may not realize is that these guys are very dependent on these guys, and these guys are very dependent on these guys. But we would think that that's kind of discoverable pretty easily. What they can't see is if this guy over here gets the flu, this guy is in trouble, which puts them both in trouble. That's really, 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 really hard to see, because you're talking about trillions and trillions of dyadic relationships that need to be curated to solve a problem like that. So Kevin Bacon was right, relationships do matter. I'm getting the axe, so I'm gonna take this really quickly. These are some snapshots of a network view of this same information, and then we can look at it over time. It's really cool in the tool because we can play movies and see how the information has changed. See it changing? Well, it did change, trust me. So we can watch it change over time. And we can look at it spatially. So here it is projected on a US map, and then on the US map over time. So you can start to see some pretty powerful things. And then we can quantify through metrics that we've derived, that we've borrowed from biology and chaos theory, different ways of looking at like things like anisotropism and homogeneity and all those different aspects of the data. We can drop new data on it. That's drag and dropping, or drag and dropping. And then, finally looking at the stability over time to answer some real customer questions, some real valuable things that we can provide to our customers. So I'm done now. This is the final advice that I leave you with, which is we do need to understand what we believe. We've got to allow data science to come into the room. We've got to be empirical. We've got to do reproducible things, not just emotional things with the data. We've got to make new mistakes. We've got to consider a language of inclusion. The first 30 minutes, nobody can talk about why it won't work. Just talk about all the reasons why it can work. And then allow new skills and new science into the room, because this is all uncharted waters for everybody. We've been using this quote from Einstein for a long time now, that we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking that we used when we created them. But I've added a new Einstein quote to our mindset, which is that everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. So thank you very much for your attention. This was great.